Hi, I'm going to talk today about a better way, a more constructive way of considering mental problems, mental limitations. Okay. So my overriding principle when I work with clients is that they are working really, really well at whatever it is that they're doing. Okay. That that they can't help but be themselves. They cannot not be themselves. So the question is, what is it about them being themselves which is causing them the problem? Okay, because what's going on here is that we have organized our rules, our policies, our procedures, the way that we live our life, the actions that we take or don't take, the thoughts that we have or don't, the conclusions that we come to or not, based upon a whole series of chance occurrences which are accumulated and compounded to bring you to where you are today. And so the question is, well, is that me? Because it feels like me, but is it? Is it really me? Or is it just the conclusion that I have come to based upon my experience, which presumably is also, I mean, the word that comes to mind is faulty. Let's say flawed, yeah? Is flawed, is imperfect, because it's based around the perception that I have seen through the veil of my experience, okay? Because let's be honest, right? The stuff that has created the mental limitations, that has created the mental problems, well, it's the same stuff, whatever you want to call that stuff, that creates love, kindness, creativity, invention. It's made of the same thing. So it's as if all of the symbols in our life, all of the metaphors, all of the archetypes, all of the meaning that comes from those symbols, they're all playing a role. They're all being utilized by us to justify our current grip on what we consider to be out there and what we consider to be in here. But somebody else has a different perspective on all of that. And that's based on their perception, based on their experiences, which feel just as real to them. And so sometimes it comes out as a mental limitation. Sometimes it comes out as outrageous creativity. And who's to say? Yeah. So if we as individuals can come to look at the way that we perceive and think and organize our life as being potentially imperfect, questionable, that there's obviously going to be more out there than we aren't aware of, well, then you can start to grapple with this idea of what you think is you and what you can think of is your problem. Because suddenly, rather than having a diagnosis for a problem, a label, I'm like this sort of approach, well, instead what's happening is that you have a certain thought process defined by a certain set of symbols, thoughts, ideas, processes running around, which are based on your perceptions from your experiences in the past, but that might necessarily not be complete. And so you can consider something else. So basically, systems, complex systems, like us as an organism, like our interaction with other people, like the interplay of all the individuals on the world, is always in flux. So the natural state of play is change. Yeah. So if things are not changing, it can be incredibly useful to shake, to take the Etch-a-Sketch and give it a good shake and completely start from the perspective of, maybe I don't know what I think I know. Maybe the way that I have come to these conclusions is incorrect, in which case you're prepared to step outside of that story, experience other things, do things differently, and see what comes up. So that sometimes that's sufficient to solve whatever this limitation is, whatever this problem is. Other times that isn't sufficient. And then what you need to do is completely scrub the story. You have to completely change the world view by which someone is living their life. But they are basically the two ways that you can get someone to overcome the limitations in their mind, right? We can either say, well, that's a fallacy. It's based around my filing cabinet, and apparently I'm not perfect at filing. None of us are. So the conclusions I've come to, I leapt at rather than considering in the fullness of all the knowledge in the universe. Or you can go one step further and say, right, okay, the worldview needs to change. And they're basically the two ways of doing it. But it's very, very useful, I think, to start from the perspective of, I'm actually working very well. I'm doing what I'm doing perfectly based around the rules of my system. And so what is it about my system which is causing that to be maintained? It's another way of looking at life from a considered perspective, another way of stepping out from behind the veil of your mind and maybe accepting that there's other perceptions too. Yeah. I don't know if that's useful. It's very existential, but I find it a great way of humbling myself, of realizing just how little I know, and therefore diminishing the conclusions that I come to. They might be right, but of all the other conclusions in the world, it's very unlikely they're the only conclusion, let's say, and there's probably better conclusions out there. And for me, that's a very useful way to start living life, because then you take yourself less seriously. You're open, you're receptive to interacting with others as equals. And perhaps even to the extent of you can see how interdependent we all are. And I think that's a great way to look at life. A very stoical approach. Thank you very much. I hope that's useful. Cheers. Bye.